I was 72 years old when my world turned upside down for the second time. The first was 25 years ago when I lost my daughter Linda during childbirth at St. Mary's Hospital in Cleveland. This time, it started with an email that made no sense at all. The notification from Ancestry DNA sat in my inbox Tuesday morning. New DNA match found. Close family. I stared at it while drinking my coffee. Close family. Linda was gone, and they told me her baby died too. What close family could I possibly have? I clicked anyway. Curiosity won out over common sense. The match showed Granddaughter with 25% shared DNA. The profile belonged to someone named Jessica Collins, age 25, born March 15, 1999. My hands started shaking. Linda died March 15, 1999. Same day, same hospital where this Jessica was supposedly born. I sat there staring at my laptop screen for maybe 10 minutes. The coffee got cold. The March morning sun streamed through my kitchen window in Lakewood, hitting the stack of medical journals I still read out of habit. Everything looked normal, but nothing felt normal anymore. 25 years ago, Dr. Stone delivered Linda's baby at 3:47 a.m. I remember because I was there, still in my scrubs from my shift. Linda had been in labor for 18 hours. When she started hemorrhaging, everything happened fast, too fast. By the time they got her stabilized, she was gone. Dr. Stone came out an hour later, still in his surgical clothes, and told me the baby didn't make it either. Internal complications, he said. Sometimes these things just happen. I kept Linda's hospital bracelet all these years. Her blood type, the date, even the room number, 314. I pulled it out of my jewelry box where I'd kept it wrapped in tissue paper. Then I messaged this Jessica Collins person. What else was I going to do? I kept it simple. Hello, Jessica. I received a DNA match notification showing we're related. I'm wondering if you might have information about your birth parents. My daughter Linda died in childbirth on your birthday at St. Mary's Hospital in Cleveland. This might sound strange, but I'd like to understand the connection. She wrote back within an hour. Hi there. Yes, I've always known I was adopted. My parents told me my birth mother died during delivery, and my birth father wasn't in the picture. I was born at St. Mary's Hospital in Cleveland on March 15, 1999. This is incredible. I've been curious about my biological family my whole life but was told there were no surviving relatives. I read her message 3 times. Same hospital, same date, same story about the mother dying. But I was very much alive, and Linda's baby was supposed to be dead. I wrote back, Jessica, would you be willing to meet in person? I think there might be more to this story than either of us knows. Before we continue, please leave a comment telling us where you're watching from and subscribe to Never Too Old channel. We're creating a community of incredible people who know that our best chapters can happen at any age. Now, back to the story. We met Thursday afternoon at a coffee shop in Westlake, halfway between us. I got there early and ordered tea I didn't want, just to have something to do with my hands. When Jessica walked through the door, I knew immediately. She moved like Linda did, with purpose but a little rushed. She had Linda's dark brown eyes and that same habit of scanning a room before settling in. Mrs. Turner? She approached my corner table, clutching a manila folder against her chest like armor. Call me Vivian, honey. My voice came out steadier than I felt. Thank you for meeting me. She sat down across from me, and I got a better look at her face. The cheekbones were Linda's, but there was something in her expression I'd never seen in my daughter, a wariness, like she'd learned early that good things don't always last. I brought everything I have about my adoption. She set the folder on the table but didn't open it yet. I have to ask, though, how is this possible? I mean, if you're really my grandmother, then Linda was your mother. I reached across and covered her hand with mine. Her skin was warm, real. And I've been mourning you for 25 years. Jessica blinked hard, and I saw tears starting. They told me my birth mother died, that there was no one else. They told me the same thing about you. We sat there for a moment, both of us trying to process what that meant. The coffee shop went on around us. People typing on laptops, ordering lattes, completely unaware that two lives were shifting on their foundations right at table 7. Jessica opened her folder with shaking fingers. "This is my birth certificate, the amended one they gave my parents." She slid it across. "Born March 15th, 1999, 3:52 a.m. at St. Mary's Hospital." I stared at the paper. 3:52 a.m. Linda had been declared dead at 3:30. They'd worked on her for 17 minutes before calling it, which meant, "Jessica." My voice barely worked. "They told me you died at 3:47. "What?" I pulled out Linda's hospital bracelet, the one I'd carried to her funeral and kept on my nightstand for years after. Same date, same hospital. "But look at this." I showed her the documentation I'd requested from the hospital years later when the grief counselor said it might help with closure. Patient ID number 99-0347. Jessica flipped through her adoption paperwork and I watched her face change as she found what she was looking for. "Vivian." Her voice was barely a whisper. "Hospital ID 99-0347. The numbers matched exactly. I felt something crack open in my chest. 25 years of grief, of wondering what my granddaughter would have looked like, what her voice would have sounded like, what she would have called me. And here she was, grown up, beautiful, calling someone else's parents mom and dad. "I don't understand," Jessica said, and now she was crying openly. "How does something like this happen?" "I don't know." I reached for her hand again. "But we're going to find out." She wiped her eyes with her sleeve. "My adoptive parents, Tom and Janet Collins, they're good people. They tried for years to have children. The agency told them I was a private adoption, that my birth mother had died in delivery and there were no relatives." "Jessica, I need to ask you something. Did anyone ever mention Dr. Richard Stone?" Recognition flashed across her face. "He signed my birth certificate, the delivering physician. He's the one who told me you were dead." I took a breath, remembering that awful night. "When I asked to see you, to hold you, he said there had been complications, that it would be traumatic for me to see the baby in that condition. He was so authoritative about it, used all these medical terms I didn't question at the time. Then he said there were health department regulations about infectious complications, that the burial had to happen quickly for safety reasons." Jessica's face went white. "But there were no complications. My medical records show I was perfectly healthy." "I know that now. But then?" "I was in shock, grieving Linda, and he was the doctor. I trusted him. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what Jessica had told me. Dr. Stone image in my head. Private adoption. The matching hospital numbers. Something didn't add up. Friday morning, I drove to the Cleveland Public Library. I'm not great with computers, but I know how to dig through old records. I started with the Cleveland Plain Dealer archives from 1999, searching for obituaries around March 15th. What I found made my stomach turn. March 12th, baby boy Thompson died during delivery at St. Mary's Hospital. March 18th, baby girl Martinez, complications during birth, St. Mary's Hospital. March 22nd, infant Williams died shortly after birth, St. Mary's Hospital, all within a week of Linda's death. All at the same hospital, all during births attended by Dr. Stone. I printed everything and spread it out on one of the library tables. A pattern emerged that made me feel sick. Over 3 months in early 1999, there were 12 infant deaths listed in the obituaries, all at St. Mary's, all with Dr. Stone attending. 12 babies don't just die in 3 months at one hospital, not unless something's very wrong. I drove home and called Jessica. "Honey, I found something at the library. There were 11 other babies who supposedly died at St. Mary's around the same time you were born, all with Dr. Stone as the attending physician. 11 other babies? All within 3 months. Jessica, I need to ask you something about your adoption. Do you remember the name of the agency your parents used?" There was silence for a moment. "I think so. Let me call them and ask." An hour later, Jessica called back. Her voice was shaky. Vivian, they said they went through an agency called Blessed Beginnings Family Services. Blessed Beginnings Family Services? And when I asked about the cost, they admitted they paid $43,000. They said there were other families they met during the process who were adopting babies born around the same time, all from St. Mary's Hospital. Everyone was paying similar amounts. All from St. Mary's? That's what my mom remembered. She thought it was unusual that one hospital was placing so many babies for adoption in such a short time period. Blessed Beginnings? And when I pressed them about the cost, they admitted they paid $43,000. They said all the families they met in the waiting room were talking about similar amounts. Same time period as the obituaries? Almost exactly. There's one adoption announcement dated March 16th, the day after I was supposedly born dead. I sat down hard in my kitchen chair. Jessica, I think we've found something bigger than just what happened to you. The next morning, I drove back to St. Mary's Hospital. I told them I was doing research for a grief support group, wanted to understand more about the infant mortality rates from 1999. The young woman in records was helpful, but could only give me general statistics. We did have an unusual cluster of infant deaths that year, she admitted. It was investigated by the state health department, but they concluded it was just a statistical anomaly. Who was the attending physician for most of those cases? She checked her computer. Dr. Richard Stone. He retired shortly after that year, actually. Moved to Florida, I think. After I left the hospital, I sat in my car for 10 minutes, thinking. Then I drove to the old neighborhood where I used to live when Linda was born. Mrs. Garcia still lived 3 houses down from my old place. She'd worked as a janitor at St. Mary's for 30 years before retiring. Mrs. Garcia, do you remember anything unusual about Dr. Stone back in 1999? She looked around, then leaned closer. That man, he had too much money for a doctor at a public hospital. New car every year, expensive suits, and he was always meeting with people in his office after hours. People who didn't look like medical staff. What kind of people? People in suits? Not medical people. They looked more like lawyers or business types, always carrying briefcases, always very secretive about their meetings. She paused. I always wondered, but it wasn't my place to ask questions. By Sunday, I knew I had to take this to the police. Not the local guys. This was bigger than a neighborhood precinct could handle. I called the Cleveland Police Department and asked to speak with someone who dealt with organized crime. They transferred me 3 times before I got Detective Alex Rodriguez. Mrs. Turner, let me understand this correctly. You believe a doctor was selling babies and reporting them as deceased? I don't believe it, Detective. I know it. I have documentation. He agreed to meet me Monday morning at the station downtown. I spent Sunday night organizing everything I'd found. The obituaries, Jessica's adoption papers, the hospital records I'd copied, Mrs. Garcia's contact information. I even made a timeline, laying out the dates when babies supposedly died versus when they were actually adopted. Monday morning, Detective Rodriguez was younger than I'd expected, maybe 45, with tired eyes that said he'd seen too much. But when I spread my evidence across his desk, those tired eyes got very sharp. These dates, he said, studying the timeline. 12 deaths, 12 adoptions, all within a 3-month window. All handled by Dr. Stone as the supplier. All placed through Blessed Beginnings Family Services. He picked up Jessica's birth certificate. And this young woman is your granddaughter? DNA confirmed it. 25 years after they told me she was dead. Detective Rodriguez leaned back in his chair. Mrs. Turner, what you're describing is a federal crime. Medical fraud, falsifying death certificates, operating an unlicensed adoption agency. If you're right, we're looking at multiple felonies. What do we do about it? First, I need to verify some of this information through official channels, the hospital records, the death certificates, the adoption agency registration. He made notes on a legal pad. Do you think this Jessica would be willing to cooperate with an investigation? I think she wants answers as much as I do. What about the adoptive parents? They're victims too, but they might be reluctant to cooperate if they think it could affect their legal standing. That's something I hadn't considered. Tom and Janet Collins had raised Jessica, loved her, given her a good life. They'd paid what they thought was a legitimate adoption fee, never knowing their daughter was stolen. Detective, what happens to families like the Collins? They didn't know they were buying a stolen baby. That's complicated. Legally, they're not at fault if they can prove they believed it was a legitimate adoption. But emotionally, he shrugged, that's going to be rough for everyone involved. Tuesday afternoon, Detective Rodriguez called me back. Mrs. Turner, I've been making some calls. Blessed Beginnings Family Services was registered as a licensed adoption agency, but there were irregularities in their operations. The state started investigating them in late 1999, and they voluntarily closed before any formal action was taken. What kind of irregularities? Too many private adoptions, too quickly, and most of their babies came from a small network of hospitals, with St. Mary's being the primary source. He paused. Mrs. Turner, I think Dr. Stone was supplying babies to this agency, not running it. Where is he now? That's what we're trying to find out. He left Cleveland in early 2000, but we're tracking his current location. Wednesday morning, Jessica called me in tears. Vivian, I told my parents about the investigation. They're devastated. My mom keeps asking if I'm going to be taken away from them. Honey, you're 25 years old? No one's taking you anywhere you don't want to go. But legally, what if they decide the adoption was invalid? What if I'm not really Jessica Collins? I didn't have answers for that. The legal implications were beyond anything I understood. All I knew was that a crime had been committed, and someone needed to pay for it. Thursday, Detective Rodriguez called with news. We found Dr. Stone. He's living in a gated community in Naples, Florida. House worth about $2 million. For a retired doctor from a public hospital, that's a lot of money. What's the next step? We need more evidence before we can make arrests. I want to talk to other families who were affected, and I want to find out who was really running Blessed Beginnings. Dr. Stone was just the supplier. Someone else was orchestrating this operation. But first, I want to find Nancy Phillips. Nancy Phillips. I remembered her from working together over the years, a thin woman with graying hair who always seemed nervous around Dr. Stone. She'd been there the night Linda died, standing behind Dr. Stone when he told me the baby didn't make it. Detective, I want to be there when you talk to her. Mrs. Turner, this is police business now. She lied to my face 25 years ago. She helped steal my granddaughter. I've earned the right to hear what she has to say. Friday afternoon, Detective Rodriguez and I walked into St. Mary's Hospital together. The maternity ward looked different than I remembered, updated with new equipment and fresh paint, but the smell was the same, that mix of antiseptic and hope that I'd lived with for 40 years. Nancy Phillips was at the nurse's station, updating patient charts. When she saw me, her face went completely white. Hello, Nancy, I said. I think we need to talk. Nancy Phillips looked like she'd seen a ghost, which, in a way, she had. I'd been dead to her for 25 years. Just another grieving mother who'd accepted what the doctors told her and moved on. Vivian Turner, she whispered. What are you doing here? Detective Rodriguez stepped forward, showing his badge. Miss Phillips, I'm Detective Rodriguez with Cleveland Police. We'd like to ask you some questions about events that occurred in 1999. Nancy's hands started shaking. She set down her pen and looked around the nurse's station like she was hoping someone would rescue her. I don't understand. What events? Why don't we find somewhere private to talk? I suggested. We ended up in a small conference room off the maternity ward. Nancy sat across from Detective Rodriguez and me, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She'd aged more than I'd expected. Her hair was completely gray now, and there were deep lines around her eyes that spoke of years of sleepless nights. Nancy, I began, do you remember the night my daughter Linda died? March 15th, 1999? I remember. Her voice was barely audible. It was a difficult delivery. We lost both mother and baby. Except we didn't lose the baby, did we? Nancy's face crumbled. For a moment, I thought she might faint. Detective Rodriguez leaned forward. Miss Phillips, We have evidence that suggests multiple infants were falsely declared dead at this hospital in 1999, all during Dr. Stone's shifts. These babies were then placed through an adoption agency called Blessed Beginnings Family Services. I don't know what you're talking about. But her voice said otherwise. Nancy had never been a good liar, even back when she was younger. I'd worked with her on and off for years before Linda's birth, and she'd always been the type to confess when she'd made a mistake with medication or forgotten to update a chart. Nancy, I said gently, I found my granddaughter, Jessica Collins. She's 25 years old, healthy, and very much alive. The DNA test confirmed it. Nancy's composure finally broke. She put her face in her hands and started crying. Not the quiet tears of someone who was sad, but the gut-wrenching sobs of someone who'd been carrying a terrible weight for decades. I didn't want to do it, she whispered through her tears. But Dr. Stone said we were helping people, families who couldn't have children, babies who would have better lives. Detective Rodriguez pulled out a small recorder. Miss Phillips, I'm going to record this conversation for the record. You have the right to remain silent and the right to an attorney. I don't want an attorney, Nancy said, wiping her eyes. I've been waiting 25 years for someone to ask me about this. She looked at me with red, swollen eyes. Vivian, I am so sorry. You have no idea how many nights I've laid awake thinking about you, about what we took from you. Tell me what happened that night. Nancy took a shaky breath. Linda was hemorrhaging badly after delivery. Dr. Stone and the team worked on her for almost 20 minutes, but we couldn't save her. The baby, though. Jessica was perfect, healthy, beautiful, no complications at all. So why did you tell me she was dead? Dr. Stone pulled me aside while the team was still working on Linda. He said there was a family waiting, a couple who'd been trying to have children for years. He said the baby would have a better life with them than in the foster system, since there was no father listed and you were, she paused. I was what? You were older, Vivian. 57. Dr. Stone said it wouldn't be fair to burden you with raising a baby at your age, especially after losing Linda. I felt anger building in my chest. That wasn't his decision to make, or yours. I know that now. But then, Dr. Stone was so convincing. He made it sound like we were doing something noble. He said the adoption agency would handle everything legally, that the baby would be placed with a loving family who could provide opportunities you couldn't. Detective Rodriguez leaned forward. How many times did this happen, Miss Phillips? Nancy was quiet for a long moment. Over 3 years, maybe 15 babies, maybe more. Dr. Stone handled most of the arrangements, but I assisted with the deliveries and the paperwork. What kind of paperwork? Death certificates. We had to make it look like the babies had died from complications. Dr. Stone would list things like respiratory failure, cardiac arrest, birth defects that required immediate cremation. Nancy's voice got smaller. I signed the nursing notes that supported his diagnoses. And the families who adopted these babies? They thought they were getting babies whose mothers had died in childbirth or couldn't care for them. The agency told them it was all legal and above board. Most of them paid between $30,000 and $50,000. Where did that money go? Nancy looked down at her hands. Dr. Stone got most of it. The agency took their cut, and, she paused looking ashamed, he gave me $5,000 for each baby. Said it was compensation for the extra work and the emotional toll. $5,000. I tried to calculate what that meant over 15 babies. $75,000 for helping steal children from their families. Nancy, who ran Blessed Beginnings. I don't know their real names. Dr. Stone just called them his contacts. There was a man and woman who would come to the hospital sometimes. Always well-dressed, always professional. They handled the placement side of things. Detective Rodriguez made notes. Can you describe them? The man was tall, maybe in his 40s, always wore expensive suits. The woman was younger, very put together, spoke with some kind of accent, maybe Southern. They drove nice cars. I remember thinking they must be doing well for themselves. Did Dr. Stone ever mention how he connected with them? He said he'd met them through medical conferences, that they were helping families all over Ohio and Pennsylvania, made it sound like a legitimate operation that just bent the rules a little to help people. I looked at Nancy, this woman who'd worked beside me for years, who I'd trusted, who'd helped steal my granddaughter and then watched me grieve for 25 years. Nancy, did you ever think about telling the truth? About contacting me? She nodded, tears flowing again. Every day. Especially after Dr. Stone retired and moved away. But I was terrified. I knew I could go to prison. And I kept telling myself that the baby was better off, that she had a good family. She does have a good family, I said quietly. But she should have had both. She should have had me too. Detective Rodriguez closed his notebook. Miss Phillips, I need you to come to the station tomorrow to make a formal statement. We're going to need everything you can remember about this operation. Dates, names, procedures, financial arrangements. Nancy nodded. Will I go to prison? That's not up to me, but your cooperation will be noted. As we left the hospital, I felt emotionally drained. 25 years of questions had been answered, but the answers brought their own kind of pain. Nancy Phillips wasn't a monster. She was a woman who'd made terrible choices and spent decades living with the consequences. But that didn't make what she'd done forgivable. The next 3 weeks moved fast. Nancy Phillips made her formal statement to Detective Rodriguez, and with her testimony, the case against Dr. Stone and the Blessed Beginnings operation became solid. She provided names, dates, financial records she'd kept hidden in her home for 25 years. Apparently, she'd been too afraid to destroy them and too afraid to come forward. On a Tuesday morning in April, Detective Rodriguez called me with news I'd been waiting for. We arrested Dr. Stone this morning at his home in Naples. FBI coordinated with local law enforcement down there. He's being extradited back to Ohio. What about the people who ran Blessed Beginnings? That's taking longer. The man and woman Nancy described have been harder to track down. But we're working with federal agents who specialize in adoption fraud. This kind of operation usually spans multiple states. I sat in my kitchen, looking out at the same window where I'd first read Jessica's DNA message weeks ago. Everything looked the same, but my entire world had changed. What happens now? Dr. Stone will be charged with medical fraud, conspiracy, falsifying death certificates, and operating an illegal adoption scheme. With Nancy's testimony and the documentation we've gathered, we're looking at 15 to 20 years if he's convicted on all counts. That afternoon, Jessica came to visit me at my house for the first time. We'd been meeting in public places, coffee shops, restaurants, while we got to know each other. But something about the arrests made it feel like we could start being a real family. She brought photo albums from her childhood. Tom and Janet Collins had documented everything. First steps, birthdays, school plays, graduation. 25 years of moments I'd missed, captured in pictures that both broke my heart and filled it at the same time. Look at this one, Jessica said, pointing to a photo of herself at maybe 8 years old, missing her front teeth and grinning at the camera. My mom said I was convinced the tooth fairy was actually a tiny dentist who collected teeth for research. I laughed despite myself. You get that from Linda. She always had the most elaborate explanations for everything. Jessica got quiet, studying a photo of herself in a high school cap and gown. Vivian, can I ask you something? Anything, honey. Are you angry with my parents? Tom and Janet? For raising me? I'd been thinking about this question for weeks. The Collins family had loved Jessica, given her opportunities, been there for every scraped knee and broken heart. They'd done everything right, never knowing they were part of something wrong. No, sweetheart. They loved you the way you deserve to be loved. I could never be angry about that. But don't you feel like they stole something from you? Dr. Stone stole something from me. Your parents just loved a little girl who needed a family. There's a difference. Jessica wiped her eyes. They're terrified you're going to hate them. They want to meet you, but they don't know how to ask. Tell them I'd like that very much. We're all victims in this, Jessica. We need to figure out how to heal together. 2 weeks later, Dr. Stone's lawyer contacted Detective Rodriguez about a plea bargain. Apparently, facing 20 years in prison at age 68 had made him reconsider his position. He was willing to provide information about the larger adoption network in exchange for a reduced sentence. What kind of information? I asked Detective Rodriguez when he called to update me. Names, locations, financial records. According to his lawyer, the Blessed Beginnings operation was just one part of a network that spanned 5 states. We're talking about hundreds of illegal adoptions over almost a decade. Hundreds? Families like yours, Vivian. Parents who were told their babies died. Adoptive families who thought they were going through legitimate channels. This is bigger than we initially thought. The plea hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning in June. I sat in the courtroom with Jessica on one side of me and Tom and Janet Collins on the other. Meeting Jessica's adoptive parents had been emotional for all of us, but they were good people dealing with an impossible situation. When Dr. Stone was brought in, I was shocked by how much he'd aged. The confident, authoritative doctor I remembered had been replaced by a frail man in an orange jumpsuit who couldn't meet anyone's eyes. His lawyer stood up and addressed the judge. "Your Honor, my client is prepared to plead guilty to conspiracy, medical fraud, and falsifying government documents. In exchange for his cooperation in identifying and prosecuting the larger network, we request a sentence of 12 years with possibility of parole in 8. The prosecutor stood up. "Your Honor, given the scope of this conspiracy and the number of families affected, the state recommends 15 years minimum, with cooperation noted for potential early parole consideration." The judge looked at Dr. Stone. "Sir, do you understand the charges against you?" "Yes, Your Honor." "And do you understand that by pleading guilty, you're admitting to deliberately separating families and facilitating the illegal sale of children?" Dr. Stone's voice was barely audible. "Yes, Your Honor." "Do you have anything to say to the families affected by your actions?" For the first time, Dr. Stone looked up from the defendant's table. His eyes found mine across the courtroom. I told myself I was helping people, families who wanted children, babies who would have better lives. But I know now that was just an excuse. I stole something irreplaceable from these families, and no amount of prison time can give back the years they lost. The judge sentenced him to 15 years with the possibility of parole in 10, contingent on his full cooperation with federal authorities. As we left the courthouse, Jessica took my hand. "How do you feel?" "Tired," I said honestly, "but like maybe we can start moving forward now." 6 months later, Jessica and I have settled into a routine. She comes for dinner every Sunday, sometimes with Tom and Janet, sometimes alone. We're building something new, not trying to recreate the grandmother-granddaughter relationship we lost, but creating one that fits who we are now. The federal investigation into the adoption network is ongoing. Detective Rodriguez tells me they've identified over 300 families affected by similar schemes across multiple states. Other grandparents like me, other adoptive families like the Collins, all trying to figure out how to heal from something that should never have happened. I still live in the same house in Lakewood, still read medical journals, still drink my coffee by the kitchen window. But now, sometimes Jessica calls me in the morning just to chat about her day. Sometimes she asks me to tell her stories about Linda. Sometimes we just sit quietly together, making up for lost time in the only way we can. It's not the family I thought I'd lost forever, but it's the family we're choosing to build together, and that means everything. So, that's my story. I'd love to hear what you think. Do you think I was right to include Jessica's adoptive parents in our new family dynamic? Let me know in the comments and subscribe for more stories like mine.